Okay, I want to introduce Dave Cecka. He was the unwilling guest of the Chinese government. I'm sure you all remember when they sent out one of their jets to welcome them into their country. Anyway, I think we all held our breath waiting to see what China was going to do and release them, because the airport there was what, Tainan?
Well, yeah, so Hainan Island and Lingshui was where we landed. So
we were glad to have him back, but anyway, he's going to brief us on the fun and games that the Chinese provided with him. So, Dave.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, to start out with real quick, if you need me to speak up or actually grab the microphone, just wave at me and I'll grab it. Otherwise, I'll just kind of keep going like this. So, thank you for inviting me here, Ross, and welcoming me here, everyone. It's good to be amongst a bunch of aviators, and just really, really great opportunity to kind of tell a story, to give you a little bit of insight into how it happened, what led to it, and kind of how we got to come home with honor. So I don't do public speaking like this very professionally or very often, so bear with me if I just, if I start circling a little bit or spend too much time talking about something. One of the things that makes these kinds of things really interesting isn't so much the presentation that I put together, it's the questions that are generated, so I highly encourage questions throughout. Just stop me and raise a hand, whatever, I'll see you and call on you, and we'll chase that rabbit for a little bit and see what comes out of it. And I could talk for 3 or 4 hours on this subject. How much time do I have? 3 or 4 hours. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time here, but then again, if we have lots of time, you just let me know when we're done. So, anyways, a little bit about me. I was born in Wenatchee, Washington, Pangborn Airfield. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. I've got a picture of me actually at Pangborn Airport there. I think I was probably 5 at one of their big air shows. And I think it was BP1 had flown in a P3 for a static display. And I had no clue what a P3 was. And there's a picture of me looking up at a P3 with my hand on the prop. Little did I know I would spend 24 years flying on P3s with the Navy. So I always love looking at that picture. It's kind of foretelling. Let's see. Somewhere around middle school, we moved to Leavenworth, Washington. That's where I did high school. Went to community college, chased down college down at Arizona State University for a while. Couldn't get inspired about a whole lot, so I joined up with a excavation company thinking I would be running tractors and backhoes and all this fun stuff. And the guy gave me a flat-bottom shovel and sent me to the bottom of a ditch and yelled and screamed at me, and I realized this is not my career choice. And shortly after that, I joined the Navy and was really excited about going out and seeing the world and all the stuff they fill your head with. And I came right back to my home state, Whidbey Island, on the other side of the mountains, but it was still my home state, which was, I wouldn't say it was a disappointment, but I was hoping to get on a carrier and get out to sea and do all this fun stuff. And I was finding out that a P3 doesn't land on a carrier. And it turned out I was really lucky to get with the P3 Navy, but that's a whole other story. And I did get a lot of opportunity to see the world, because VQ1 is called the World Watchers, and they deploy everywhere. So that's a little bit about me. I joined in '96. I got assigned to VQ1 in about '97. The incident that we're talking about happened April 1st, April Fool's Day of 2001, just months before 9/11. So that's a little bit of context of everything that's happening here. I enlisted in the Navy. So I enlisted as an aviation electronic technician, AT, and my main goal was to fly. That's what I'd always dreamt of doing. And my only way to do that was as an air crewman. And back then you had to have a base rate as a maintenance technician, and then you volunteered to be an air crewman operator. So it was the best of both worlds. You had someone that was on the aircraft, knew the systems, operated the systems, and also fixed all the systems. So it was kind of a good setup. So as I tell this story, and how many pilots do it? Is everybody pilots here?
Yeah.
Is it pretty much straight across the board? I mean, it sounds, just listening to you guys talk, you're all maintenance technicians too, so you know both sides of this and can feel it too. So, but my perspective on this story is strictly from a guy who sits in the back with his head stuck in a bunch of equipment and listen to a bunch of squeaks and things like that. And that being said, I'm familiar with aviation. I've got over, I think it's about 5,600 flight hours with the P3. But a lot of like the pilot, flight-oriented stuff, I'm not going to be as familiar with. But I can attempt to answer those questions. Just be aware, I'm the guy in the back. So, all right. So that's a little bit about me. A little bit about you guys. Any prior service members here? Where's my pie so I can kind of see who we got? Oh, that's a good amount of you guys. So, Navy?
You bet.
P3? One? Oh, did I see a couple? I think maybe just one. Two? Okay. All right, so familiar with VQ1? So VQ1, you're going to see some pictures up here in a little bit. There's a picture of it back there. It's not a normal P3. It's a reconnaissance aircraft, or if you followed all the news, it's the spy plane. We're basically an airborne vacuum cleaner. If it transmits or radiates, we intercept it, and that's pretty much what we do. So I specialized on radar, and that's what my focus was. So let's see. Let's change the slides, see where it takes me here. Oh, yeah, of course. So VQ1's been around a long time. Cold War stuff, been in all the major conflicts, pretty much from the Korean War on. Let's see. I wanted to ask one more question about you guys too. Anybody have any, throughout all their time flying in the service, have intercepts through maybe the Russians, Chinese, anybody? Raise them up high. Okay, so I would say it's relatively commonplace. It happened quite a bit during the Cold War. You didn't hear much about it. There were conflicts. We lost aircraft. Lots of service members lost their lives during these types of reconnaissance missions. And you don't really hear too many stories about it unless you go looking for them and studying history and digging. But it's not particularly well known. So I always try to start out with a little bit of just context for people that maybe not you guys, but for people that aren't familiar with what this kind of mission set is up against. And also for context, this is post-Cold War. We're right in this little niche where we're on top of everything, right? There's not a country out there that can shoot a bullet at us, right? This is the mentality that everybody had in the military. The Russians are out there chipping rust off their fleet. China hasn't really done anything yet other than we just keep an eye on them. And that's pretty much it. It was living off of the stories of everybody that grew up, fighting the Cold War. So that's kind of that little niche. And of course, the world changed shortly after that. But
before you switch that slide, what kind of is that a Martin Mercator?
Okay, that is oh my gosh, and is it P4M? It's a P4. So it's a jet and a prop plane.
Okay, so it's the predecessor. Yeah,
Mercator, I think is what it is. P4 Mercator, does that sound right? I think that's right. What is it?
After the P2.
After the P2? Yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple seats out of one of those airplanes.
Really? Well, I should have brought some of my aircraft parts too, but I got enough stuff. Well, anyways, so this is Korean War. I'll just read it real quick. In the early morning of August 23rd, 1956, a U.S. P4M-1Q electronic reconnaissance aircraft was shot down near Shanghai by Chinese fighters, with all 16 of its crew killed. There's way more to this story. If you're ever just interested in the history of some of this, I encourage you to kind of look it up. But it gives context to what air crew face on a day-to-day basis. I mean, this was the Korean War time frame. On 15 April 1969, you guys familiar with the Super Constellation? Great aircraft. I love that aircraft. An EC-121 Mike Warning Star on a reconnaissance mission was shot down by North Korean MiG-21 aircraft over the Sea of Japan. All 31 Americans, air crewman and pilot, on board were killed, which constitutes the largest single loss of U.S. aircraft during the Cold War era. And I think that's a great picture of the inside of it. Just gives you an idea. I mean, I can't imagine like 30. We carried 24 people on our aircraft, and I thought that was crowded. 31's a whole other story. And they were doing the same mission that we were doing. Okay, just a quick little note. It says the first EP3 Ares 1 joined the squadron in 1969. That gives you context of the time frame for VQ1. They were in Guam, and then they eventually transferred out to Whidbey Island. So I had basically just gotten my aircrew wings, which is just a lot of flights and bounces and NATOPS check flights and all that kind of stuff. I had been on a couple deployments, one to Okinawa, which is what you see up on the screen. I'd taken a couple deployments out to Bahrain and gotten my certification for positional qualification, and then was working on my Big Look qual. And anybody here know what Big Look is? Does that sound familiar to anybody? So you'll see over in the picture in a couple of this big M&M radar looking radome underneath the front of the aircraft. So it's this huge high gain antenna that transmits, and also we use for receiving. And so on the receiving side of it, that was my job, and I would just manually slew this thing and point it at a spot, and we just suck up everything that we could possibly get. Very, very sensitive, and that's the Big Look operator. So this was my first big, qualified Big Look deployment, and we went to Okinawa. You can kind of see where Kadena Air Force Base is there. Anybody been to Kadena before? Okay, so there's people who've been there, and beautiful island. I loved it there. Great place to fly out of. This is our aircrew. I'm the guy that still had hair back then. That's kind of on the knee there. Lieutenant Osborne, he was the guy that was in the news a lot. He was our pilot, one of our pilots, and he's just up and to the left of me there. We were all relatively junior enlisted, junior officers. Lieutenant, that was the highest ranking officer. And this guy right here with the mustache was Senior Chief Nick Mellos, and more hours on the P3. He was our flight engineer, basically the leader of our crew, enlisted guy, and Greek, very, very, very Greek, and just a joy to fly with. But when things went bad, he was up and down the aircraft. He owned that aircraft. So I couldn't have picked a better guy to be flying with us in that crisis moment. So. Navy guys like to party, and so this was the weekend right before the flight. A day and a half later, we went on the flight that we ended up having the intercept with. And this, of course, is me. I still have that shirt, but my wife won't let me wear it, so it's in my closet. Incidentally, the guy to my right is Scott Guidry, and he'll come up a little bit later in the story. He was another operator and sat right next to me. So here we are, April 1st, April Fool's Day of all days, 2001. We take off. We would do a 3 o'clock pre-flight for a 5 o'clock, so 03 for a 05 takeoff. And then you had to go and do all the pre-flight stuff. There was the pre-flight, getting all the food and everything up on the aircraft. So they were very early mornings, and then they were like 10 to 12-hour flights, and then we'd come back. And then, of course, since we were the technicians, had to stay and fix all the stuff on the plane, too. So lots and lots of hours spent on this plane. It's kind of sometimes a love-hate relationship. There's another picture of the plane flying.
Was that a phased array radar? Or?
Mm-hmm. So some of this, I'll just kind of put this disclaimer out. There's some things I can tell you about. There's a lot of stuff I can't tell you about. Ask the question anyways, and we'll have an understanding. I'll just let you know if it's something I can't chat about. This particular version of the plane was the Ares 2. We didn't really have any phased array type things. If you imagine just a big kind of clamshell looking radar dish spinning around in there, that's kind of what I was using. So nowadays it's a completely different story. These aircraft are way high tech. So
What's the thing behind the radar dish?
okay, so those are the upper and lower canoes, we call them, and it's just radome material, and there are a whole bunch of antennas, receive-only type antennas, up underneath the top one. You can kind of see it there in the lower one. Yeah, it looks a bit like a porcupine there. Yeah, we were not considered covert in any way. Like when we took off, usually there was an army of local people at the airports. I don't know if you've ever experienced this. Japan loves aviation, and in particularly American aviation. They are fascinated with our aircraft, and they take thousands of pictures of everything from close-ups of tail numbers and aircraft and times they. I mean, they do it in the sense that it's like a collector type thing, but I mean, they could easily. It's kind of scary because we would go to their air shows and they'd bring these huge binders and stuff, and they'd open them up and show us, like, here you are. I'm like, oh my goodness, how do you know that? Because there's all these people with these huge telephoto lenses at the ends of these airports just snapping pictures, and I don't know, it's amazing. But
You're probably familiar with the magazine Koku Fan over there?
I'm not. Yeah.
It's exactly what we just say. These guys just publish all these cool pictures.
Yeah. I mean, you're rock stars at those air shows. They come on and they want to get pictures with you with their kids, and they want to trade for your leather flight jacket. I mean, everything. They want all your patches, and I couldn't believe it. But anyways, the point being is that all these pictures are being taken all the time, and could easily know where we are, when we are, what aircraft we are, and be ready for us when we get to, just in international waters off of the coast of, say, China. So they were ready for us every time that we got there. We took off. We were on station. It took 2.5 hours or so to get off the coast of China. But there's a lot that happens on the way there. So as an operator, you go get a cup of coffee, cup of hot noodles or something, and you sit down and you are for 10 next 12 hours just going through the tuner bands and listening for whatever's out there. And so yeah, it's a situation where it's to a certain degree it's safety of flight. It's also mission oriented, intel gathering type stuff. But you don't get up off your position for anything, really. Like, and if you have to go use the head or something in the bathroom, you do, but you get right back on your paws. It's one of those things. You're very, very dedicated to it, and if you have to go do anything else, someone's going to sit your paws for you. So as much as I always like to get up and look out windows when we got intercepted, I usually avoided that. I did that when I was a trainee, take your pictures, and it's a lot of fun. But when you're a qualified operator, you have the responsibility to sit there and monitor and keep us safe. So we get out there, and we had kind of gotten the South China Sea, and we were coming down south just off of Hainan Island, and we were just triggering intercepts the whole way down. Every time we get to a certain region, they would send up their aircraft. These are a couple examples of common aircraft that we would see back then. MiG-21 F-7s was the Chinese variant that they kind of reverse engineered and rebuilt. That's the one you see on the left. J-7, but they're F-7s now. And then they're indigenously designed and produced finback there, F-2 or J-2. They're pretty proud of it. That it's a fighter, but it wasn't. It doesn't compare to much that we have today. Those are common ones. So they were coming out. They'd fly up. We'd know they were taking off. We'd track them the whole way, and then the pilots would say, "Hey, we got them in sight." And then I would track them with my radar or my antenna, and we were situationally aware as much as possible. And meanwhile, there's surface contacts, everything is happening, and we're trying to keep track of all of this. We get about just down to the south of Hainan Island, which, let me just see if I have I don't have one. Just south of Hainan Island, and we turned around and we're coming back up. And we got tippers that there was another 2 aircraft, F-82s like you see here on the right. And that they were coming out to intercept us, which no big deal, relatively commonplace. And so one came up right behind us in a firing position and just sat there. And that was also relatively common. They'd like to kind of flex on us a little bit. They come up, show their missiles and things, and then come back and park right behind us. And then the other little trick that they love to do, so China would now be on our port side, and it kind of curves like this, and then they would park on our starboard side and not allow us to really turn. And so they would sit there, and they would, knowing eventually we're going to go into their airspace. And so there's these little games that happen like that. So you can see the aerodynamics of this aircraft, these Delta wings, they got to be flying fast to be good and maneuverable. We got a 4-engine turboprop. We can load it back pretty slow, and that's generally the idea. Is you slow down, they start to lose a little bit of their stability, they'll peel off, and then we make our turns. Relatively common. So, yeah. The funny thing is, like, you guys can understand some of this. You have the experience of flying. I tell this story sometimes to people that don't understand aviation, and their eyes get really, really big, They're like, wait, you do that? Like, that's a thing? Like, you're not supposed to be able to see other aircraft in the sky, But it was so commonplace we didn't even think twice about it, which complacency kills. That's what you hear about. That's what you teach in aviation all the time. So, when you start getting comfortable with something dangerous like that is when things can go south. It's preaching to the choir, I'm sure. Go ahead.
Do you have a feeling as to why they bothered to do all this stuff?
Okay. So when you ask that question, are you saying to come up and just place themselves in?
Every day doing the same thing over and over again, wasting all that fuel. Are they training? Or what?
So it's just I guess look at it this way. If they were flying their fighters and their planes within 50 nautical miles of San Diego and Seattle, we would be intercepting them and putting pressure on them and showing them that this is not a friendly place for you to be. So that's the best way I can describe what they were doing. Now, there's a good professional, international rules way of doing that. And then there is what's going on, or what was going on then, and actually is now happening again. You guys know what bumping is? You ever heard of bumping? Where they come in really, really fast just below you or even just above you, and then that air pocket or whatever just causes you to poof like this. That happens all the time. There's probably a much more professional way of describing what that is and why it does, and you can teach me about that at some point. But I just know the effect of it sitting in the back because your coffee flies out, and and you got to catch it, and it's crazy. But anyways, yeah. So it's an aggressive sort of we don't want you here, and it's semi-harassment really. But I don't blame them for it really. It's just what we would do in the same situation, in my opinion. So. I think we were more professional aviators by far, but this was then, and I think maybe things are different now. But I mean, it's no different than what's going on in the Cold War with the Soviet Union. There's so many of those stories out there too. I'm sure you guys have heard those stories from people. But does that help answer your question a little bit? Okay. So we took off. We're doing this thing. These 2 aircraft come out to visit us, and I'm tracking a lot of stuff. There was. I don't know, I probably had over 20 different cases, which is, something, a ship, a submarine, aircraft, land-based things, and I have a case for every single one of them, and they're all active, and I'm busy trying to keep track of all this stuff, plus keep track of these aircraft that are moving all around us and things. So I'm not really paying attention to what's going on inside the aircraft with all the other operators. I got my screen in front of me. And next thing I know, Lieutenant Cumberford, who is one of our other pilots, comes up, taps me on the shoulder, and he's like, Cecka, you need to come look at this. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So I'm thinking maybe something's wrong with the aircraft. He's asking me, and he's like, you're never going to see anything like this in your life. Just come look. And I'm like, it feels weird because he's asking me to get off my pods with all these active cases, and I look up and down, and I'm like one of 2 people sitting at pods right now. Everybody is out of their positions. They're all pasted to the windows, and I'm like, okay, well, this is weird, but let's go see what's going on. So I walk down the tube, the center of the aircraft, to the port overwing exit, And the reason why we go there is there's this beautiful big old window, and you can kind of crouch down and see everything, which is immediately what I didn't want to see, because this F-82, which you can see up here on the right, is larger than life, like sitting in my lap. And his wing was about 5 feet over our wing, and he was just moving around like this. And I'd never seen anything like that in my life, and I don't ever want to see anything like that ever again. And I immediately reacted. I'd seen lots of intercepts. I thought I knew what to expect, was not prepared for that, and I immediately pulled away from the window, ran back up to my station, reached up, and started putting my parachute on, which is never what you want to do, because it scares everybody else. They're like, what, did they call for a bailout? What's going on, you know? And so I'm halfway in my parachute when I'm going to tell this a little bit ahead, and then I'm going to play a video for you. When he lost control of the aircraft because I said we were slowing down. They start to lose stability, and he basically tried to pull forward. And the way, and you hear his version of it, or the Chinese version of it, we sucked him into our prop. Like we turned it. They think we chased him down and ran him over, but what really happened is he lost control of his aircraft and he drifted back into our number one prop, which tore up the aft end of his aircraft. He lost total control. He tried to thrust out of it, and his nose popped up and came down across our nose. So we're talking the front radome, all the radar, all the other equipment and waveguides and everything, ripped all of that off. The pilots could see daylight down by their feet, and so all this air's coming into the aircraft. It immediately decompressed. We were about 25,000 feet. Now, all of these props, when you shut them down, are made to feather. You know, obviously you guys know about that, streamlined, you know, so you don't, doesn't turn into the sea anchor and drag. Number one engine completely got wiped. The props held, but they didn't feather. So the aircraft twisted, and all of the other, like all the stuff flying up, fought it out, all the other aircraft, all the other engines. So they're getting chip slights. They're getting, they lost hydraulics on, I think, engine 2. I don't know, all the things they would normally shut engines down for, but so they kept some of them going, obviously. The aircraft immediately lost, I don't know how much speed, but enough that we flipped and then dropped out of the sky 25,000 feet down to about, I don't know, it was about 4,000 feet or so before we pulled out, to the point where I registered that we were now not falling out of the sky and I could actually stand up. I'm halfway into my parachute at this point, right, just before this happens, and my buddy comes running up, the Scott Guidry mentioned earlier, is sitting in that picture next to me, and he's like, Dave, what are you doing? And he was going to tell me that I was getting into his parachute, because ours are right next to each other, and he was going to give me a bunch of crap about that when it happened. He got thrown up into the ceiling. I got smashed down underneath my paws just due to the twist of whatever was happening. And I remember the whole way down, which seemed like forever, I'm sitting there staring at him up on the ceiling and staring at, you know, I can't move. I was like, I mean, you think about what you're going to do in a situation like that, and you plan for it, you train for it or whatever, and you think you're going to put your parachute on and wander up to the cabin door, open it, and jump, right? I wasn't even going to be able to finish putting my parachute on. It was just one of those situations. We had a microwave in the back. We had a cooler full of soda cans. Air Force made great box lunches, and people like to have big salads and stuff. So just imagine all of that. Just shake, 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 and throw it across the room. Soda cans turned into missiles. The microwave flew down the center of the tube, all the way down, missed every single person, and hit a bulkhead right at where my paws was. And how nobody got killed in that alone is just a miracle by itself. Those soda cans, I don't know how people didn't get killed with those things. Nobody got injured in all of this. There were some sore spots, there were some pulled muscles. Nobody was hurt or killed, and I still don't understand how that's possible. Nowadays, I would never do that. I would never have all those, just knowing the possibility, and not even getting hit by another aircraft. Just turbulence alone can cause all kinds of problems. So this, we go down, we pull out. I'm going to pause that story, and I'll take any more questions right before I play video. Any questions up to this point?
Ever get your parachute on?
Yes, yes. Part two, after we watched the video, as soon as we leveled out, I finished putting it on because they were telling us to bail out. So
Yeah, we got a couple of J guys in here, we're laughing our asses off about.
I lucked out being on the P3 side of things because half of my class got orders to the VQ P3 side of things, and the other half went to, what was it, VQ4 or 5? VQ4 and 5, I think, is what they were, and they flew on.
A3s?
Yeah, EA.
Yeah.
EA3, is that right? I think it's EA3s, but those guys were stuck on the ship doing cat shots and all that stuff, and they don't have any room for anything. They were lucky to have a cup of coffee. I don't even think they had that. So
You weren't flying for 12 hours, though.
that's a good one.
A couple transpecs, but.
That was the ES3.
Yeah, choose your age, choose your fate, is what they say. Even though I didn't get a choice in that, they just gave it to me. And my buddies that were sick that day that didn't go flying, was the first question they asked wasn't, hey, are you okay? You say, they wanted to know if we're going to get per diem for our time in China. Like, there's no per diem rate for China.
But the money goes a long way.
Yeah. All right. Let me also get a little context of this particular one. So this, our particular Ares 2 EP3 didn't have cameras on it. We had like a telephoto camera that we could use and wander around and shoot out windows and stuff. But there was not a turret or anything that you would think of when you see a video like this. This video was taken in, I guess, in January. Yeah, it says there in January of that same year. So just a few months before. This is the same aircraft, the same pilot, and darn near the same incident with a slightly different result. And this aircraft was a P3 that did have a turret, a camera that they could use to look at stuff. And so this is the video that they released to the press to kind of demonstrate what had happened.
Very nice.
What's up?
Day or night?
Day, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hunter, 8119 or 2. Port SS Tally Toronto. You. Sure. Yeah, we got a DID on it. Guys are going up. Port SS both. How are we? What's right there? Oh, on the right beside us. And altitude. Go ahead. Whoa, we got front. Hold that one. We got front. CSF 13.
Wow.
Afraid of those propellers.
Yeah, you'd think.
Problem identifying.
You're right.
Close. He's very, very close. He's almost probably 20 feet from our wingtip. So he's inside of our wingtip. That's a minute. K90, where is he? 90 has decreased slightly in altitude, still trailing 630, maintaining his distance. Ooh, he got himself this guy's got a little bit of props. He's squared away real steady.
He just slowed down until they departed.
That was the strategy.
He's having a hard time maintaining his airspeed. He's got his flaps down a little bit. Oh yeah, he's up towers.
So he pushes it right.
Okay, he's moving out a little bit. He's falling back. 92 is falling back.
And departed, I mean like departed control flight, not in the area.
You really got to know something.
Okay, he's coming in underneath your under the port wing and tightening it up on that side.
That's not a generation.
He's just practicing slow flight.
So that gives you a concept of what that was like and how close he actually was. It just same almost flight profile, just a slightly different outcome. So, anyways.
Where's the island on this map?
Yeah. So Hainan Island is the pink one, right up there. Lin Shui, You may not be able to read it, but it's the little red dot on the island in the south. That's the military airfield that we ended up landing at. Approximate location of our collision. I got this off the internet, so I'm not sure where they got their information, but that's where they say we were at. And the Parcel Islands are there, Spratlys, you can kind of get the feel of it. Okinawa is just off and to the right of Taiwan there. So, kind of gives you an idea.
Question.
Go ahead.
Any idea why they came in so close like that?
To show off, a bravado kind of thing.
That's incredible.
To demonstrate that they're a formidable foe, you know, like, I don't know.
They were taking pictures of you.
Yeah, that too.
They were posting pictures of you about how close they got that last flight to show their buttons.
Yeah, that's true too, probably.
Did the Chinese pilot punch out? Did he survive?
That's a good question. So I didn't see it, but I listened to our pilots told us, they said that they saw him punch out. I don't know what happened after that. They said they saw a parachute. The Chinese say he didn't make it. As we were going down, his wingman was right behind us, requesting to open fire, and Chinese wouldn't let him, and basically followed us all the way down, and then we pulled out, and then that's sort of the second part of the story. So
were you in Chinese airspace or not?
at this point, we were not. I don't believe we entered. Now, I can't speak with 100% authority on this because back then we weren't really using GPS and things like that. It was all inertial navigation and charts and logs and things like that. And they had some GPS, but not like we have today. And my situational awareness with my equipment wasn't that good. But what I remember is that we were definitely in international airspace when this happened. And as the next few events kind of unfolded, we made some decisions and eventually intentionally entered Chinese airspace and landed in Lingshui.
So you mean 12 miles or 200 miles?
Yeah, good question.
Never mind.
That's a good question.
Never mind.
Yeah, we were close. We were close. I'm being recorded. I'm not going to say where we were. I will say that it was, and I'm not familiar with international standards and all that stuff, so I know the number, and that's where we always fly off of. Every single country we fly off of. But I don't know if I want to say that. I'm not 100% certain. So, but yeah, it was an internationally recognized international airspace distance. It was far less than 200.
That's what was the actual number?
12 is where it's
What was
at.
the actual nautical miles?
Okay, we were at 50 nautical miles then. We're good.
So a lot of countries would claim 200 miles. And
Okay.
claim an 80.
Yeah.
It's a fishing
Their defense
distance.
identification zone
Yeah.
and stuff like that, but that's all kind of
Yeah.
their claim.
Yeah, very rarely do we go closer than that. I mean, okay, well, in these types of situations, very rarely would we go closer than that. Like when we flew off of Somalia and places like that, that's a whole other story. So, anyways, any other questions before I go on to kind of what happened next? No? Okay. So, so civil aviation, military aviation, it's all based on practice, preparing for crisis, drilling, doing drills. From a pilot's perspective, I know they're training all the time. You're up there, stalling your aircraft and figuring out how to pull it out of a stall, all that kind of stuff. And we would do that all the time. We'd fly out over the straits, and the pilots would go through all of their checklists, and we would, in the back, would do all of our drills, fire of unknown origin, bailout drills, ditching drills, everything under the sun. You were just constantly, it became this thing, like if you were a trainee and you answered a question incorrectly, they would bail you out, and you'd have to go get on all your parachute stuff and get everything ready to go and go through all of your emergency survival items, and if you got that wrong, then it was even worse. But we all hated it. But the drilling for all this, all the practice, all the training, it never became more focused as to why we do that than this particular moment, because you're falling out of the sky. I wasn't particularly religious at the time, I was born and raised Lutheran up until I graduated high school, and then never looked back. I never really turned around and made Christianity mine. It was my folks, and I just was along for the ride. I got up and close with God personally on that drop out of the sky, and it wasn't until years later I recognized it from my own personal experience what that was, because that's a long time to think about what happens when you can't do anything about it, and eventually you're going to hit the water. And it was peaceful. I've never felt more peaceful in that moment, and this is just my personal experience. I'm not saying this was the same for everyone, but it was just a peaceful, everything's going to be okay, and I knew it wasn't going to be okay. It didn't make sense. It wasn't logical, but that's how I attribute that. That's a quick little side story because I was talking about training. But you would think you would be horrified and terrified, and maybe some people were, and especially once you pull out of it, and now you realize you're not going to die, but how do you keep from not dying? Because the whole plane was shaking apart. The noise in there was incredible. You couldn't hear anybody talking to you or screaming at next to you. You couldn't understand anything. Stuff was flying around inside of the aircraft just because all the air was moving around. It was pretty horrifying. However, we all had a job to do, and it was something that we had drilled for and trained for. And the first thing that we got, they came down, pounding us. I said, bail out, get ready to bail out, and up and down too. So this is crazy because parachutes came out of their racks and stuff. Nobody knew where their gear was. Their headsets and ICS gear were thrown all over the place, so we couldn't get on that and try to understand what was going on with the communication system on the aircraft. So everybody's trying to get in their parachutes. And when you have a job to do, and it's something you've trained to do, you go to this special little zone inside of your brain that somehow isolates itself from fear and shock and all of this stuff. And you ask yourself how soldiers can, charge the front lines of something with bullets flying. It's because they've trained to do it. It's not because they're superhuman or anything like that. It's just that drilling and training. I guess I hit this point really, really hard and kind of keep going at it just because it's so incredibly important, which you all know. I know you all know this, but just from a life experience of why, I want to share that with you. So they bailed us out, or prepared us to bail out. We all got into our parachutes. We lined up on the inside of the aircraft holding the overhead bar, and they were getting ready to open up the main cabin door on the port side and eject at 1 second intervals. Typically, they kind of want to sort of arc the plane a little bit and give us a relatively good chance of not bouncing off the side of the aircraft and the elevators and horizontal. Help me out here. What's my term? Yeah, thank you. Thanks, pilots. I appreciate that. But that wasn't the case. They barely had control of the aircraft as it was. They had lost their sense of airspeed, angle of attack. Barely were able to control the aircraft. I think they were doing some of it with the power of the aircraft, of the power of the propellers and stuff to kind of help steer us. There's these big HF long wires that had all come separated and were wrapped around some of the ailerons, so it was a big mess. So they were getting ready to bail us out, but I guess they were afraid that we wouldn't be able to successfully evacuate the aircraft without killing ourselves on the way out, or we're going to be spread out so far with by the time you throw the life raft out, it was going to be far gone somewhere. I don't know the decision-making process. I think they thought they might have enough control of the aircraft to successfully ditch it. But at some point, they started tapping us on the shoulder saying, okay, well, we're not jumping out of the aircraft, we're not bailing out, we're going to ditch the aircraft. So start going through our emergency procedures where we basically take all the classified stuff and throw it off the aircraft. Emergency destruction procedures. Again, we drilled for that. Actually, 3 of us had drilled for it quite a bit because when I first joined, we had a lot of folks that spent a lot of time as air crewmen all the way through the Cold War, all that stuff where it was a top priority thing that if there was any chance any of this stuff was going to get into the hands of the enemy, we had to destroy it, get it off the aircraft, all that kind of stuff. And then we slipped into this time frame where the complacency, there's no other word for it, there's complacency, and we stopped drilling that. type of stuff. So there was a good portion of the crew had never done emergency destruct drill in their entire career, and we were pretty junior, so it wasn't that long, I guess. But it was interesting. So it was a little bit of chaos. Like some people grabbed fire axes, these big sharp pointed axes, and back then it was an old aircraft. We had CRT tube monitors, big heavy things. I think they were originally contracted for submarines, and they didn't like them because they were too heavy, so they gave them to the P3s. That joke never shakes my head, because they were something like close to 300 pounds. Each one of them, and took 3 people to get them up onto the aircraft, and that was my job, and so I hated these things. But they're built like tanks, and for whatever reason, some of the people were thinking a good emergency destruct thing would be to go through and break out CRT tubes, which, if you know anything about that, they explode glass everywhere, and thank God they couldn't effectively break these CRT tubes, which speaks to the design. They're pretty heavy duty. Most of the equipment on board was, it wasn't like what you think of today. They weren't computers. They didn't have hard drives like we have. We didn't have laptops. We loaded our in-flight mission computer with these tapes, like these reel-to-reel tapes. You'd stick them in there, and it would try to load. It usually took 3 or 4 times. It loads into there. If you kill power, it loses everything, and you have to reload it again. And one of the good things was from a mission, not from a safety of flight avionics perspective, but from a mission capability, like how much equipment do we need to actually perform a mission? We were barely mission capable. We're towards the end of our deployment, and there's a lot of times where a box fries, we don't have one to replace it, and then they make a decision. Do we still have enough to go flying and complete a mission? So there's barely anything working on this aircraft from my perspective, from an AT's perspective. From the mission commander's perspective, checking the block, we can go perform a mission. So a lot of the stuff just didn't work, or wasn't even on the plane. But the stuff that was, they're big bulky boxes, and you either hit a button and you zeroized it, or you killed power and it zeroized itself, so it's just hardware at that point. The real magic of all this stuff is in the software, typically. So from that perspective, we couldn't necessarily get boxes off of the aircraft, but killing the power and zeroizing it was an effective way. The media like to say that we had phosphorus grenades and vials of acid that we could dump into these things and melt we didn't have anything like that. Nowadays, we have these incredible shredders, NSA approved, cross-cut, turns it into powder type shredders. Back then, I think someone said, hey, we need a shredder on the aircraft, went down to Office Max and got the cheapest thing they could, threw it in the back, and our shredder couldn't handle anything. We didn't have a shredder that worked.
Do you have any crypto gear on there?
We did. Crypto is probably like one of the #1 things, yeah. So it comes on the aircraft. So that's the stuff that basically encrypts all of our communications. If you're not familiar, that's what it does. Changes on a day-to-day basis. There's a timeline of it, and you never want the enemy to have that, because they can go back and figure out old transmissions. So it's really important that we get rid of and shred that stuff. And so those things always show up in big metal boxes. You punch some holes in it, you throw all your crypto gear in, it's really, really heavy, and you toss it into the drink, and it goes to the bottom of the ocean.
Is that about a foot cube?
Yep.
KW7.
Huh? Oh, so you're familiar with exact.
Crypto there.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that I can say with 100% absolute certainty that all of our crypto. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Okay, so we decide not to bail out. We're getting ready to ditch this aircraft. We go into this emergency destruct procedure. There is some effective things happening. We didn't have laptops, so we had these big, thick 3-ring binders of study material and reference material, and it was unique to every position because we all had different jobs, and so we built our own working papers. And so to make things really, really great, we put them in all these little plastic sleeve protectors, right? Which, when it hits the water, we didn't think about those things floating around. And, but that's what else do you do when you don't have a laptop to keep all this information? So all this stuff is just getting piled up, and then someone's like, well, how do we get it off the aircraft? Well, a couple of us, including one myself, had actually done one of these drills before, and I knew we're supposed to open up the overwing exit and throw this stuff out over, whatever, we're over the ocean at this point. I've never done this. Nobody's ever done this. Nobody talks to you about how this is supposed to happen. And nobody could understand. There was no chain of command, no communication. And they all just were like, you're the big hook operator. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm the senior enlisted guy, at least on the inline. I'm like, okay, well, I know what the NATOP says. And everybody know what the NATOP says by any chance? Anybody not know what the NATOP says? Okay, so just in a nutshell, it's sort of this safety, it's everything procedurally that has to do with safety of flight procedures, emergency procedures, equipment, everything. It's like the Bible of aviation specific to this aircraft. Does that make sense? I don't know. Did I do a good job explaining that?
Yep.
They call it the big blue sleeping pill because as you're going through it, you're just, So the NATOPS says, exactly how you do this. You drop below 10,000 feet, and you're supposed to go up to this big oval door. It's got a T-handle. You pop it out. You pull this thing off, toss it to the side, and start throwing things out. No big deal. But, you don't drill for, how do you do this? Is this okay? Am I okay, guys? Am I okay? I don't know. Well, I just did it. I didn't even know if we were 10,000 feet or not. So I grabbed this T-handle, and I'm pulling on it, and I can't get the door to come out, right? So two things working against me. There was all this air pressure coming in from where the air in the front was pushing in, so it was shoving the door up. And then there's all this, negative pressure. Who knew? There's negative pressure over a wing, flight. But I don't think about it that way, not usually. And so anyways, I can't get this thing off, and it doesn't...
It wasn't a blowing, it just came on.
So I set my parachute on, my helmet on, and my buddy, Scott Guidry, who's the same guy you saw in the picture, realizes I can't get this door open. So he grabs this big old NB8 parachute and starts pulling too. So the two of us are now pulling, and we're bigger guys. This thing should have come off. It finally breaks loose, and we go flying backwards with this big door on top of us. And I thought there was a lot of chaos and air movement and noise before. Well, now you got these two engines just, groaning away out there, and then all of this noise just of the air escaping from the door. And I was like, okay, well, this just happened. Let's just get this done. And so there's this big pile of stuff. I grabbed this big leather, huge suitcase thing. It's got all this these working papers and stuff in it, and it's not light. I pick it up, and I step kind of like from you to me, and I pick this thing up, and it's like, and I'm like, oh crap, because I'm like, I don't want to get anywhere near this. There's so much suction right at that door. I could step away and it would drop, and then and so I just let go, and it's like out of my and so yeah, and so we just started doing this, just sending stuff out there, and again, should have been scared out of my mind, like I was going to be the guy that gets sucked out of the aircraft, But you start to realize there's this threshold where you can feel it, and then you step back from it a little bit. So we go through this, and people keep bringing stuff up. We keep sending it out. The crypto bag went out, and all of that stuff. And so,
do you think that sank? That bag?
The metal one absolutely did. It had holes in it. It
But the leather one.
So I don't know what happened. I can tell you what I think happened. And I can tell you a little bit about the results of some of the things afterwards. I think those bags hit the water, exploded, and those binders with all those plastic sheets went out and probably floated for days. Yeah. And I think that, I know that they launched their civilian fishing fleet out there shortly after it happened, and they were out there scooping stuff up. So who knows? I know a couple documents that did end up showing back up, so they did get some. The kind of things that we had is sort of that I know that that I know kind of stuff. You never want to be in a position where that stuff gets out. The really, really bad stuff, the big things that weren't in those working papers. Crypto's a big deal, but that's sunk to the bottom of the ocean. So, I honestly, I don't think there's any way they couldn't have recovered some of that stuff. So,
they got a
yeah, but nothing beats a shredder, and that's what we wish we could have done. But this is the story as it occurred. So that stuff went out, and then I had to figure out, like, so one of these big oval doors, you have to line them up just perfect to get them to fit back in place and pop that little T-handle back in place. And when you're sitting there, putting your plane to bed and going out and, plugs and covers on your overwing, no big deal. You struggle with it a little bit and you put it on and it's good. When you got all this suction, I'm surprised I didn't lose the thing out there along with everything else. And it took me a while. Like, I kept not lining it up right, and it just wouldn't get in there. And I was like, how am I going to get this thing back in place? And then I remembered there's this little pin that sticks out the bottom of it. I never fully understood. Like, why would this pin, and you got to line this pin up right with the hole in the door. And I was like, well, maybe if I put it perpendicular and just kind of line it up with that pin and bring it up. Turns out some engineer had thought this whole thing up. Like, and you just line up the pin and you let go, and as it goes up, it perfectly falls into this pin and closes just perfectly. I was like, wow, that's impressive. Somebody thought about this and engineered it. So,
Of course, they didn't tell you.
no, that's actually not even in the NATOPS, but maybe we should have told them that. But it worked. That's the bottom line. And so we closed it, and then I turned around and realized there was another pile of stuff that people had brought. So we had to go back and do this one more time, but we were experts at that point. So we got everything that they brought us off the aircraft. And at that point, they had done some sort of evaluation that they didn't have enough control of the aircraft. They didn't have enough sort of a situational awareness of the angle of attack, the airspeed, all the things that you need, the sea state, they didn't know that, all the things you need to successfully ditch an aircraft like this. They didn't have any of that information, so they made some sort of a decision that we needed to put this plane on the deck somewhere. And to this day, I haven't got a good explanation from anyone how they ended up picking that location. I will say this, is that back in those days, there was kind of your axis of evil. You're not going to land it in Russia, you're not going to land it in North Korea, and you're not going to, land it, where was the other one?
New Jersey.
Yeah. Oh, Iran, that was the other one.
Cuba.
Yeah, Cuba probably, yeah, Russia. But so I don't know that anybody really had briefed or planned or thought about the situation of what if we're putting one of these planes in China, There's these levels of things that would happen if we have to land in a country where we weren't planning to land in. And it's different levels of emergency destruction, and, you hang out on the aircraft. There's all kinds of things that you do. But nobody, to my knowledge, had ever planned on one of these planes ever being in China. So they're like, well, that's the closest, and they picked it for whatever reason, and the last I heard, we were ditching the aircraft. So after we cleaned up the inside of the aircraft best as possible, we sat in our seats, faced aft, put our helmets on, strapped in, the whole bit, and started to prepare for putting this plane in the water. And that was the first moment that I remember feeling fear. Out of all this stuff, out of everything that happened, I never really felt fear or felt scared or shock or any of that stuff up until I sat down and had absolutely nothing to do but think about it. And I just sat there just, oh my gosh, like this is going to be it, because I've seen like everything you've ever seen in World War II, aircraft ditching and all that stuff's just going through your head, straight. That's the way my brain thinks. It's like a movie. And so that's what I thought. And I just remember it's taking forever. When is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? Well, when we sit in an aircraft and when we landed on an airfield, there's this moment where reflections of light from rooftops and other things like that start shining through the overwing windows and things like that. And it starts moving. It's different when you're over water. When you're over land, you can tell you're approaching land and that you're about to put it on an airfield. And I remember seeing that, and I was like, couldn't understand that because we were supposed to be ditching in the water. And I remember this is what you'd feel like coming into an airfield. And then I remember banking real sharply, and just boom, we were on the deck. And I was like, greatest landing ever. It was the worst landing ever, but it's the greatest landing ever on the same breath. So that kind of gets us to that point, and I probably skipped a whole bunch of slides. No, that's perfect. So there you go. There's a little bit right after we got on the deck there. Within minutes, they had a whole bunch of trucks and things lined up. That's what you see there, and that other one. They're all lined up. A bunch of military guys jumped out. These old old rifles with bayonets on them, and we're pointing them at the aircraft. So this is Ling Shui Airfield. There's a picture. These are kind of grainy. You used to be able to get on the internet and get really good high quality versions of it. I should have downloaded the pictures then. Now they're these like thumbnail image ones. They're all grainy.
Any of you guys armed on the aircraft?
Not then,
Okay.
because the whole concept is that we're very covert. I mean, we're very overt. You know, we don't carry weapons. We're not that type of combatant. So if they were to pull us off and we have pistols, that was the wrong posture.
Right.
At post 9/11, everywhere this plane went, and then my follow-on special projects aircraft, we were armed to the teeth. So that was a total different story, though. So
The overhead pictures, was that our satellites?
I couldn't tell you. I doubt it because they're the ones on the internet. So it's whatever got released to the press. Everything you see here was released to the press. So it's possible. I kind of doubt it came from the military. At that point, you know, Google Maps wasn't a thing yet, so I don't know where these would have come from. Who knows? It might have been overhead stuff from the military. You know, they just sanitized it.
Was anybody outside of the airplane aware of the situation? Were you communicating with, was the airplane communicating with anybody?
Right up to the point where, yeah, we were communicating with various locations. So keep in mind, crypto that loads our equipment got thrown off the aircraft, but we still had crypto-loaded gear that we were communicating with, and over open air as well to their airfields. And they all speak English, broken English, but English. So yeah, there's a lot of communications happening. Right up until we killed power and zeroized our crypto gear, and yeah, so there was a lot of awareness. You know, our country knew it was happening instantaneously as it was happening. So there's a picture of our #1 prop after we hit. I mean, that's a testament to those things.
Oh, let's see the other guy.
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Is that the inboard engine? That's probably the inboard.
So that's the port side, most exterior, most outboard #1 prop.
So they didn't need the whole thing, but most of it.
Nope. Yeah.
And are those things hanging down, antennas?
Yes, they are.
Gotcha.
Yep. Those are called ALD9 antennas. So this is my crew. This is kind of a fast forward moment. This is after we realized that we weren't going to be getting right on a commercial airliner and sent home. So there was this period of time where we were like trying to figure out what we were going to do. You know, what do you do? At some point, you sit on an aircraft for so long, you're going to run out of food and water. We would probably stayed on the aircraft about 3 hours. And then they started to point their rifles at us. And at some point, a decision was made, let's just get off the aircraft and see if we can make contact with someone, a representative from the United States, and start figuring out this mess. So we dropped our ladder. We got off the aircraft. We brought everything that, like, my buddy had a huge backpack. And this guy had every multi-tool, Rambo knife thing you could dream up. He was like a survivalist type, and his pack was full of this stuff. You know, if we had, so yeah, apparently we were armed. now that I'm thinking about it. You know, I had a multi-tool and a pocket knife in my flight suit. There were things like that. They never searched us once. They never confiscated that stuff. We could have brought all kinds of stuff off the plane with us if we'd really wanted to, but who knew, you know, so. But they put us on a bus. Do you have a question?
You guys SEER school grads?
Yes.
Crew?
Yes. Anybody here not know what SEER school is? Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape is what it stands for. You know, loosely based out of things that happened in Vietnam. Well, realistically, even back to World War II, but where it became a reality that we needed to train our guys for this was out of our experience with Vietnam. And it's prisoner of war training. And it's basically how to survive and how to return with honor is the essence of it. everybody can be broken. We know this, and it's at some point how do you live to tell the tale, but do so with honor, right? So, so that's the kind of training that SEER School provides. This was not. We weren't at war with China, so POW, like the rules changed. We weren't a POW status. We were governmental political detainees, and there is training that we do get for that as well. And I can't go into too much about that, but but they do train us very, very well. It's the Air Force. How many Air Force guys we got? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very, very, very much. Because throughout the whole thing, we pretty much had their playbook in our hand. There was nothing that we were surprised with. So I'll leave it at that. Pretty much the first day, maybe day and a half, I in my head was like, this sucks. This is really bad. This is not what we wanted to have happen. But someone's going to cut us a bunch of orders. We're going to get on a plane and we're going to head back home. Yeah, I mean, this is your mindset when you deploy somewhere. You got your set of orders and
get hold of PAO, get us out of here.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so that's my mindset. I think mostly everybody felt the same way. But I mean, when you have a mid-air collision and someone loses their lives, like you don't just walk away from that. There's an investigation. We have our FAA. I don't know what they do in China, but they want to put puzzle pieces together, and we're the witnesses to the incident. We're not going anywhere. I hadn't thought that far ahead, but that's ultimately kind of what started to unfold. And so they put us up they drove us off into the Lingshui base somewhere. And some of the things that initially caught me is this place looked like it had been built in the 40s or something and never maintained. The cement on the airfield was all cracked and weeds were growing out of it. It didn't look like an open airfield to me. There were some fighters, there were some 4-engine turboprops, reconnaissance birds, things like there's several types of aircraft that as we were driving away, they were all launching, going out to try to find everything. We probably threw off the aircraft. Maybe to go search and rescue for their pilot too. But it just struck me how run down it was. They took us to this 2-story cement building, open air, kind of a barracks. It had no windows. Everything was cement, no decor, no carpet. It looked like something, that never got completed or whatever. It was not up to, Western standards by any stretch of the imagination.
Parking garage.
So it felt like. Yeah. We're walking up to it, getting off this thing, and we're strolling on like, okay, well, we're going to hang out here. And then coming out of the building are women and children carrying not even suitcases, just clothes and stuff. And it struck me as we're walking, they're filing out, we're filing in. This was like all the people, the military folks, their families and stuff, this is where they live, right? And they booted them and sent us in there. It was kind of a humbling moment. Even in that particular moment, it struck me as what was happening. Did I see a question over here? No? Okay. And then it immediately struck me the living conditions that they treat their military service members and families like was incredibly below what we would consider the basic stuff. There was like a dirty mattress on the floor. There was like a chair, and that was a room. Everything was dirty. It was a shared bathroom, and the bathroom was this smelly, nasty room with a table and a bowl with water in it, no running water, and a hole. And that was it, open sewage into a hole. And so it was like, it really struck us, like the difference, like culturally, like, things that we take for granted are so different in other countries, especially China, especially back then. So just observations. We got our own rooms. They came in, medically checked us, gave us a bunch of stuff. Some of us had sore muscles and things. They gave us these pads. I had a sore back, and I pulled some muscles, and they came up. There's a pad, like a medicated pad, sticky pad. They stuck one of those on my back. I to this day don't know what it was, but the pain went away. I got happy and giddy for about 24 hours, and it was fantastic. And my crew still gives me crap about this because they asked me if I wanted a back massage, and I was like, yeah, that sounds great, and I'm all happy about it. And then this little Chinese dude comes up and gives me this back massage, and they're just like, like making fun of me. To this day, they still give me all kinds of guff over that.
Did you have to do a piss test after?
Yeah, they didn't, but it wouldn't have probably turned out good. I have no idea what was in that, but it worked really well. This is the part of the story that can drag on and on. I'm going to try to get through it. There's so many little stories along the way. I'll just hit the highlights, so ask questions if you're curious about stuff. About halfway through the second day, we realized that Lieutenant Osborne was nowhere to be found. He was our senior leader guy. He's a representative. He made the request to see someone from the United States, all that stuff, and all of a sudden, where is he? We don't know. And at that point, we asked them, and they're like, well, he's not cooperating, he's not answering our questions, and we've taken him off somewhere. And I'm like, okay, everything just shifted. At that point, we realized all the warnings and cautions and all the training we ever got, we shifted right into seer mode. This is way more than what we were expecting it to be. And so everybody got pulled in to one room, and they were small to begin with, and we're like, okay, well, we're going to sit here and just monitor. Nobody's going to get taken from here on out without us all knowing about it. So up to that point, it became real apparent to us that they wanted us to have 3 square meals a day. They were very, very adamant about it. And they gave us what was really good food to them. From our perspective, they gave us a mess kit that had been just come out of a steamer, and we opened it up, and there was a bed of rice and a half a fish. Now, when I say half a fish, they took an entire fish, didn't clean it, didn't do anything, put it in this thing on rice and steamed it, cooked it, and you either got the head or the tail. And with the and I'm just like, wow, okay. And then these military guys, the Chinese military guys, also got the same thing. And they were just eating it up like it was the greatest thing they'd ever had. And it probably is. But our Western standards and what we're used to are completely different. You know, it wasn't General Tso's chicken or anything. This was their standard fare. And so from their perspective, they treated us very, very well. But they were, as it turns out, China was trying to be a much stronger world player, be recognized as a world power. They were trying to get the Olympics. They were trying to enter into several different trade agreements and things like that. They wanted to be recognized, and they knew they had to treat us to a certain level. The JPRA guys, that's the SEER guys, the Air Force guys, fully expected this to turn into, Vietnam style, bamboo shoots under the fingernails, that kind of. They were thinking it was going to be bad. In reality, they treated us very, very well. But we still were missing Lieutenant Osborne. And so we're like, well, what do we do? Well, we're not leaving this room and doing anything they tell us to do until they allow us to communicate with them, to see them and find out what's going on. So we tell them this, and they're like, no, you're coming down for lunch. And they're like, no, hey, guess what? We're going on a hunger strike. Because obviously this is important to you, and we don't have much leverage. This is what we got. So we threw that out there, and they got all flustered, and we slammed the door in their faces. I don't have my picture of him up there, but Nick Mellows, the Greek guy with the big mustache, it was him and Lieutenant Cumberford at the door. And he's a pretty intimidating guy, he's big and tall and burly with a big old mustache, and he rides a Harley, and so he's like that kind of mentality. And so they go off, and about 30, 40 minutes later, a couple more guys come up with the same guy, and they're like, yeah, you're coming down, we got food ready, you're coming down. We're like, no, we're not. Boom, close the door. Well, so this went on kind of back and forth for, I don't know, 2 days, 3 days maybe, something like that. And it continued to escalate. Eventually, they came up and they had the guys with the old rifles and these big long bayonets, and they pointed it right at the guys at the door and said, you're coming down. And they looked them in the eye and slammed the door in their face, told them to F off, we're not doing anything until we know what's up. And I didn't know what, I was like, oh, this is it. Dudes are going to get blown away, and we're going to have to go eat lunch. And but they didn't. They didn't. That's the important thing. We had just gauged it perfectly to realize what was happening and how much power could we get before they started getting physical. Because at this point, they hadn't even grabbed us or thrown us around or slapped us or any of that kind of stuff. So at that point, it was a glory moment for us. It was a huge victory moment because they didn't fire shots or stick anybody with those things. And And then next thing you know, one guy comes up. He's like, okay, you can have lunch with them. You got to come down. You're not allowed to talk to him. You're not allowed to speak to him, or touch him, or go anywhere near him. He'll be one side of the room. You'll be in the other. Everybody agreed? Yes, we're agreed. Good to go. So on down we all go. We sit down, and we're just kind of hanging out. They bring in lunch. We're not eating. And finally, he comes in. The second he came in the door, this wasn't planned. It just happened. We all stood up and we just, hey, what's going on? Good to see you. How you doing? How you been treated? And the Chinese guys are freaking out. They got cameras and they're like having this whole thing. And we were just the wild, crazy Americans they didn't know what to do with. And they were totally unprepared for our culture. Like, they just didn't understand that we wouldn't follow directions to the T. And so it was this great, great victory moment for us. And for him too. They hadn't been treating him too bad. They weren't allowing him to sleep. They just had two guys in there blowing smoke in his face all night long, kept the light on, and it was sleep deprivation type of a technique, wearing him down. And of course he wasn't cooperating. He wasn't answering questions, but they weren't really pressuring him very hard either. So that connection moment was really kind of, we realized we had way more power in the scenario than they realized, I think. So this went on for a while. We put out watches. We started to do a 24-hour watch. We kept logs of our observations. There was one moment when middle of the night, me and my buddy were sitting there on a watch, and we were looking out into the jungle, and we saw someone all dressed in fatigues, in a ghillie suit kind of stuff, all black, step out of the jungle, wave at us, and then step back into the shadows and disappear. I got zero confirmation that we had boots on the ground there, but that had to have been what it is to me, because they were ready to move and pull us out, but at the end of the day, we were 24 people. How do you get us out of there, without a conflict of some kind? So at some point, maybe due to that element, maybe due to some of the indigenous issues that were going on that didn't really want to see us come out of there too safely, they decided to move us from Lingshui up to Haiku, which was more of a city. And it was a military compound. It was more of like a hotel kind of place. And we were up on like the 7th and 8th floors. And that's when the interrogation started. We were able, due to our negotiating power, we were able to continue down that road. And how do you negotiate with your captor to limit your time being interrogated to 10 minutes a slot? We just did, and they didn't know what to do with us, so we negotiated, you can only ask us questions for 10 minutes, which was really bad for them, because they were very stuck in this world of trying to, before they would ask us one question, they would dump all this propaganda on us, and it was like a world history lesson of, all the crazy capitalist, terrifying things that the United States had done to the world from their view or whatever, and that would take up darn near 10 minutes all by itself. And so you just sit there drinking water the whole time, and when they start asking you your first question, you'd be like, I gotta go to the bathroom. And they didn't want to hear that, and so then you'd get up and be like, I'm just gonna pee right here, and then that was enough, and they'd let you go. And then by that time your 10 minutes was up. That worked for a day or two, and then they started paring down their time with their propaganda stuff, and that's when I realized the power of a uniform, regardless of what country it was. For me, I was an E5. Second-class petty officer, are very used to respecting a higher rank, and when a higher rank tells you to do something, you jump to and you get it done, even if it's a Chinese captain, and so this Chinese captain was interrogating me with two of his like NSA type dudes, often with their little laptops and whispering and asking him questions, and they wanted to know what my job was on the aircraft. I knew immediately that I couldn't tell them darn thing about what my job was on the aircraft. And I'm a terrible liar. If I'm preparing to lie about something, you're going to see it a mile away. I knew this about myself from going to SEER school, because I couldn't fool anybody. And what I thought I was prepared for, I was completely unprepared for. So I just jumped to the first thing that we all kind of did was like, my secondary job is to fight fires when there's a fire on the aircraft. So I'm like, I'm a firefighter. I fight fires on the aircraft if there's, and we do have fires all the time, like smoke and fumes type fire. And he just looked at me. He's like, and he's doing this. He speaks perfect English, but wouldn't speak one word of English with me. He used interpreters, and basically is saying, I have no respect for you if you can't even tell the truth about simple things and all this. He just laid into me real heavy, and I was feeling about this big, and because I knew I'd lied straight to his face. And and then he proceeded to tell me that everybody he's interviewed up to this point said the same thing, that they're all firefighters. You're not all firefighters, so why don't you start by telling me the truth? How am I supposed to believe anything you tell me if you can't tell me the truth about something? So I was in a world of hurt at that point because all my strategies has just been flushed down the toilet, and he immediately followed up with a bunch of questions I couldn't answer. And so then I just shifted gears again and said, well, I'm an AT. I'm an aviation electronics technician. I fix equipment, which isn't the best route. You don't want to give them that too quickly because then they're like, well, what equipment do you fix? What's that equipment? And so it leads you down to, so it's just a game of cat and mouse of dodging back into things that you can talk about and staying away from the things that you can't talk about. And I can't talk too much about SEER school, but I got to share a quick story. One of the things they tell you is to stay in the circle, right? There's the circle of the things that you can talk about, and there's outside of that circle of things you can't talk about. And I remember when they were putting up their slides, there was this little red dot, and they'd be like, if you talk about this, the red dot's in the middle of the circle. If you talk about this, it's the red dot's on the outside of the circle. And I couldn't remember anything from SEER school during anything from these training sessions and all the lab stuff that we did during the interrogations. But the one thing that was constantly in my mind was this image of this circle and this red dot. And it wasn't something I consciously processed. But I could see that red dot moving inside and outside of this circle as they were asking me questions. I felt my stars getting too close to the edge. I'd find something I could throw out to bring my little red dot back in the circle. So that was the experience of the interrogations. We had a lot more leverage and power during that time frame than they realized.
Did they separate you in living quarters at the second location?
They did. Two people to a room. They took our doors off. It was this long hallway, so we could stand there and talk to. We weren't supposed to talk to anybody, but we were supposed to shift rooms. But we could see people. They had one guy on watch that would watch the whole length of the room, and they again thought that's what we would do. So if we stuck our heads out and waved to the guy down the road and give him the finger or something, all this stuff that we do, they would come running down and yell at us, and we couldn't understand what they were saying. Then they'd go back and sit in their chair, and then we'd do the same thing again. They were constantly dancing back and forth. So we would switch rooms, and then we realized that they have a hard enough time telling who's who, the same way that we do. It's like Americans all look the same, right? So they couldn't keep track of where we were. So we would pass messages around that way and just kind of keep morale up and stay unified. If they had actually put some effort into separating us, it would have been a completely different story because we could compare notes and find out who's having a bad day or any of that kind of stuff.
Any females on the crew?
We had 3 females, and they were on a different room. There was nothing, or a different level. They put them in. They were on the men's level. They were on a different floor, but we kept them real close. Stayed up with them because every time we met for meals or anything like that, we brought them in real quick and make sure they were being treated well. We realized we didn't have any clue how long we were going to be there, so we started trying to do some military regular type training and things like that. We do PT training. And the funny thing is you get 23 some odd people all doing jumping jacks in unison in your doorways. The whole floor shakes, right? And we didn't tell anybody we were going to do this. We started PTing, a couple times a day. And so these guys, with the whole floor shaking, like with this stuff. One guy comes down, he's like, wait, what's going on? All this stuff, he's speaking Chinese. And then he's like, he couldn't process what we were doing. And then he goes back and gets a couple more of his guys. I sometimes hesitate to even tell this part of the story, but I think it's safe in this crowd. One of our guys decides he's going to strip down completely, right? Nothing on, and we're doing jumping jacks. And so this group of guys comes running up, stops the stairs, they lose their footing and slip down the hallway, and then they go yammering down, and they were like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, no. So there's so many little stories like that. This is like how the story can stretch. But there's just all kinds of little things. We weren't supposed to, this picture you see, anytime the cameras and video cameras would come out, this was our stance. It would just basically, we're not giving them any propaganda material. We don't want to look happy. We don't want to be eating or anything that would because they can use a picture like that any way they want to. So that's pretty straightforward. That's about as best as we could do anyways. So, and they did that a lot. They would get in there and do these propaganda speeches to us before we'd eat, and we took control of that pretty quick. We decided to do awards quarters, which is kind of like what we're doing here. You know, you're going to recognize some people, and so you call everybody to attention, and you bring a couple guys out, and okay, you're our crewman of the day. Usually we had air crewman of the quarter, of the year, or sailor of the quarter of the year type things in normal Navy, but we would do it of the day. So we always had somebody, there was always somebody different, and they had a big long speech talking about how great they were and why we were recognizing them. So they'd be in the middle of doing their propaganda speech, and Nick Mills would stand up at attention on deck, and we would stand up, chairs would go flying, and so-and-so front and center, and up we'd go, and the Chinese were losing their minds, not knowing what we were doing, and not how to control us, a bunch of unruly Americans or something. But it was fun for us, kept morale high. I know we're probably pressing on time, so there are a lot of stories. We decided to make chess sets out of the water bottles and cardboard boxes, which was really cool because there were two of their lieutenants that were with us from the day one all the way through. Befriended them, maybe not the greatest thing to do, but not this way the worst. But when we built our chess set, they were fascinated with that, and they wanted us to teach them how to play chess. And so we had a whole entire tournament bracket set up, and they were part of that, and they did beat a lot of us. They were pretty good at it. So not too many of them ever wanted to talk to us, but the day that we were released, they told us that negotiations had gone south, that we were going to be taken to the mainland and released to the people in the streets and be put on trial for espionage, and who knows where that was going to go from there. So a pretty dark down day for us. And then we got to the place where we were going to get on a plane, and that's where the news came to us that it actually was the other way around. We were going to be getting on a plane to go home. The second they told us that we were going home, I don't know, there were probably 10 or 15 of the Chinese military and some in civilian uniforms or civilian attire. Their attitudes changed like this. All of a sudden, every single one of them could speak perfect English. They were coming up to us and shaking our hands and saying, they're real sorry that this is how we had to come to their country, that we should come back. To their country under other circumstances, and it's a beautiful country, all this kind of stuff. They wanted to trade money, trade ball caps. I got some of their money sitting there. It was just weird. It was surreal, but it was just such a welcome change. From my perspective, it was a real human moment. It wasn't about all the other stuff. It was about, a certain amount of military respect between countries, even adversaries, that there's that human element, that connection, right? So there's also an intel gathering moment that you have this small window of opportunities. Hey, we're going home, great, tell us everything, So you got to be careful. But from my perspective, I didn't see any of that. It was much more of a camaraderie moment than it was anything else. And then they put us on a plane.
Whose plane?
What's that?
Who provided the plane?
Oh, gosh. I wish I could. What's that?
United.
Was it United? Yeah. Oh, does it say on there?
Continental Airlines.
Oh, Continental. That's right.
United.
That's the one I remember now. That's yeah. Okay. Well, we got on the plane, and there was some basic staff, but there was a lot of people that they weren't allowing any military to come into their country. However, about 75% of the people on the whole plane were in civilian uniforms that were actually, or civilian attire that were military. And exactly the kind of military people you wanted on the plane with you if things went south. So even all that being said, as we were on the plane and getting ready to take off and then getting into, international airspace, that there was this sense of, are they going to come out and intercept us? Are they going to turn us around? Are they going to force us to land in mainland China? And we were just kind of like, oh, we'll believe it when we see it. It's kind of the expressions you get. But once they announced we were in international airspace and heading to Guam, the plane turned into a party, so which was great. This was the first moment where I started feeling really shell-shocked. I was game-faced pretty much for 11 days. They kept us for 11 days. So I was just in the back decompressing. I wasn't part of this picture. We went to Guam. We got new flight suits, shaved, showered, that type of stuff. and then put us on C-17, flew us to Hawaii, and that's the aircraft you see us. We're landing in Hawaii there. Eventually, after doing some repatriation stuff where we got interrogated by our own people for 3 days, for good reason, but oh my gosh, I told this story to triple letter agencies over and over and over and over. It was something. Lots of stories there too, but we don't have time. So this is when we landed in Whidbey Island, Washington, and this is now my 23-year-old son who joined the Navy and flies on P-8s, which is basically my job, but in the new aircraft. So he got to walk in my shoes a little bit, which is pretty cool.
Genetics will show.
Right. It was a pretty cool moment when he decided to do this. So that was a great moment, great picture too. So what happened to the plane? This is the Ukrainian, you guys could probably tell me which one this is, Antonov something. So again, they wouldn't let any U.S. military come in, but this plane was big enough to do the job. They took a bunch of L3 contractors that were already set to remove it. I mean, they worked down in Waco, Texas, doing depot level, removing the wings and doing all the cleanup of any corrosion and rebuilding our aircraft. Put them on board this thing, flew them into China, and they started to dismantle the bird. And that's what this series of pictures is. You can see them taking them onto the plane.
How much was left of it by the time you got to take it away?
Everything.
They didn't touch it?
They touched it. So these guys knew EP3s very well because we sent all that stuff on there. They depopulate all the equipment before they do this depot level work. They said they've never seen a plane that clean. all the racks, all the stuff behind the racks that collects dust and odds and ends, FOD, right? Stuff that we're supposed to keep up.
But they put it all back together?
Yeah, but nothing was in the right spot. They didn't map out where things had come from very well. So they took it out and tried to figure it out, cleaned it up, and tried to put it back, but everything was in the wrong place. And these guys knew it. They did it all the time. So you can see it here, just various stages.
Did they ever fly again?
That's a very, very good question, and I want to answer it shortly after you see these pictures, because it's pretty incredible. So yeah, quickly answer your question. So the pieces and parts were flown into, I believe, Waco, Texas, where they started to clean it up, put it back together, replace whatever they needed to replace. And the goal, they wanted this plane back up and flying on track off of China and Hainan Island ASAP. And just a really, really amazing group of people that got this accomplished. And I want to say it was less than like 6 or 7 months later, this thing was up in the air and flying. And not long after that, did they form up a crew and send it on deployment right back out. So we were typically, you saw pictures of this thing. It didn't really, you could tell what we were, but you couldn't really say it was a VQ-1 bird. Didn't have our bat on it and things like that. When it came back out, we had the biggest tail art of our squadron logo on there. And some airframer went out there and painted a silhouette of an F-8-2 with a little line through it. I don't know to this day how that got approved to take off and sent out. It got, I think, to Hawaii or maybe Wake Island when the word got out that this was going out there, and they immediately went up and made us scrub it off. We can push this, but we can't push it quite that far, So interestingly enough, so 9/11 happened. We got this hero's welcome back. The country we hadn't really been dealing with anything too dramatic like this. I don't know, it's probably since the Gulf War, maybe even further back. I don't know, but it had been a while. And so there was this huge PR moment for the Navy. They put us in front of every news person, put us on, they were lining us up to watch space shuttle launches, everything under the sun. They sent us out to do an air show and meet the president and a bunch of other politicians. It was this whirlwind thing. We went to New York and watched a Yankees game, met was it George Steinbrenner put us in his box. I think that he's the owner at one point. I'm not a huge baseball guy, so I think that's his name. Was his name? It was this crazy thing, and then 9/11 happened, and the whole world changed in an instant. You guys know that very well. And I immediately went on shore duty, which is what I wanted after this. After 9/11, I wanted to be put on the pointiest tip of spear I could find, and I had to wait 2 years. And there was this moment where this special projects P3 group was interviewing my students and recruiting them. And I ran into my senior chief at the time. I was like, I don't know who these people are, but the kinds of questions they're asking, that's where I want to be. And he didn't want to let me go because he knew I was coming back to VQ1. And if I went to these guys, he'd never see me again, not professionally anyways. And but I was real adamant about it, so they interviewed me and said, well, you got your bags packed? We can get you orders right now, because they had the detailer sitting right there. And I'm like, well, can I call my wife and see what she thinks? Because I haven't even talked to her about this. And they're like, no, you need to decide now because we're leaving. And I'm like, yeah, all right, it's Hawaii. How bad could it be? So that choice got made, and I spent the rest of my career working for special projects, which was incredibly awesome. So that's what I did, and then I retired. I came back here to Whidbey Island and retired as an instructor, which was a great opportunity to tell this story over and over to the guys that are coming up. So it was a good way to pass the torch on before I retired fully. So. And there's so many other stories, but I got to cut this short for you guys.
Yeah, we got things we got to do.
I know you do. I really appreciate your time having me here. Appreciate your questions, and I'll be here for a little bit, just kind of cleaning up if you want to